Welcome, everyone. I am your host today, Beth Jarris from the Population Reference Bureau, and I am delighted to have Andrew Reamer here today to talk about how you can get sort of started in participating in the federal decision-making process. Just a couple of housekeeping items. This is a meeting, not a webinar. And so while we will keep you muted while Andrew is talking, it's a decent sized group today, but not so big that we can't have an active conversation. So when he wraps up, we can go ahead and take questions. I'm going to ask that you raise your hand and I will call on you. You're also welcome to put your questions in the chat and I can ask them that way if you have a reason why you don't want to be on voice or video. Happy to field questions that way, but you're also, when we get to Q&A, welcome to turn your video on, unmute yourself, and ask. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Andrew.
Thank you, Beth. Hello, everybody. I'm Andrew Reamer. My day job is a research professor at the GW Institute of Public Policy at George Washington University. And a lot of my work is in the realm of federal statistical policy. I came to Washington 20 years ago because I somehow figured I could make a living being, in a way, a cultural liaison between the people that produce the data and the people that use the data from the federal statistical system, because it turned out that neither one really understood the other. And as a result, I've had opportunities, some unexpected, some proactive, some reactive, to influence how the federal statistical system works. And the purpose of today's webinar is to give you the benefit of my experience. The federal government really does a remarkable job of offering people like us, like APDU members, opportunities to provide input, and it does a terrible job of publicizing those opportunities and provides really no guidance or incentive for people to respond. So in economist terms, there's information market failure here. Again, this has helped me make a living, and the purpose of this webinar is to talk through the what, the why, and the how of providing input to federal decision makers running the statistical system. The what, and you saw from the blurb that's inviting you to this webinar, there are 5 realms that I've identified in which each of us can have input. And one is responding to requests for comments on proposed standards, proposed rule. The second is responding to requests for information, where the government is pre-decision making, pre-even drafting, and really trying to gather information to make an informed decision. The third is responding to submissions by federal agencies to the Office of Management and Budget to get approved to collect data. Every federal data collection that goes to more than 9 people has to be approved by OMB under the, to my mind, ironically titled Paperwork Reduction Act. And it's a bit complicated, but we'll discuss that. The fourth is advisory committees, of which there are many, and you probably know of a number of them in the statistical realm, all of which have to be public meetings unless there's a really good reason for closing the door. And every public meeting has to have a public comment opportunity. And then the fifth type of opportunity is to the House and Senate appropriations committees as they review the president's budget requests for statistical agencies. Each committee, each subcommittee of House and Senate appropriations it invites the public to submit written testimony, what's called written witness testimony. And there's a due date. Actually, 2 of them are passed, and the next 2 are this Friday and next Friday, in which you can provide input on thumbs up, thumbs down, or commentary regarding specific requests. In this case, the president's FY25 budget for the Census Bureau and Bureau of Labor Statistics and so forth. So what I'm going to do is walk through each of these. Stop for 2 minutes after each 3 or 4 minute presentation and just ask for any really quick questions on that, because each one of these is different. And then, as Beth says, we'll have plenty of time at the end to wander around this. In lieu of a slide deck, what I'm going to do is share my screen, and I've put on my computer an array of web pages just to give you examples. Before beginning, I want to talk a bit about the why to make input, provide comments, because I would say, in my experience, over half the people I mention this to say, why bother? No one's going to listen to me. And that is not true. Federal agencies are, first of all, they have to ask for public comment on most of the stuff. But despite the fact that they have to ask, they're for the most part, hungry for input. They want affirmation. They're people. They want to know people care about what they're doing. They're looking for good ideas. In some instances, they have to publish your input. They may not agree with it, but they have to publish it and often say why they disagree with it or why they agree with it. So they are always looking for people to network with. So I have made a number of friends at OMB, for instance, through my commenting on requests for comment. With that, I'm going to start, and I'm going to, Beth, we set this up, so I'm going to share my screen and start with requests for comments. Okay, so most of these notices, not all, but most of them come through the Federal Register. I actually have a weekly newsletter I do for an academic association in which I list these things. And if you are interested in getting that, I'm happy to add you to the list. There's no cost to it. And you can write APDU and they can send me your email address. So here's an example of requests for comments on initial proposals for updating OMB's race and ethnicity statistical standards. This was put out January of a year ago. This is, as you know, the standards for race and ethnicity, they were almost ready to go at the end of the Obama administration, got killed by the Trump administration, and was revived by the Biden administration. So here is a request for information from OMB regarding their draft standards, and you've got 75 days to respond. As a result of that, they got 20,000 comments, which is unusual when most requests for comments get 0 to 1. And so this is a big deal, clearly, because it affects a lot of people. And the result was a second set of standards that were finalized. So that's example 1. Here is example 2 of a request for comment. Now, as many of you know, there is now something called the Evidence Act, which is a fairly new thing that requires every federal department and independent agency to have a 5-year learning agenda, as in identifying what they want to know to have better evidence-based policymaking. The Evidence Act requires every department and agency to have a chief data officer. And over the last year and a half, 2 years, each department, if you go to evaluation.gov, you will see each of the learning agendas, the 5-year learning agendas, with the questions. And a lot of the questions are data related, as in we want to know X, and we need to figure out how to collect the data to determine X. This is an example of the learning agenda from the Department of Transportation. And they published this in February. This is a supplement. They're updating it for FY 24 to 26. Oh, this is a, okay, it's a request for information. I may have Okay, so this is, I'm just looking to see if there's a draft. Requests for comments are typically on a draft. Request for information is typically where it's just open-ended, and I'm not quite sure. It's like this is a request for information, but it's the same idea. They're asking for input. We published a FY22 to 26 learning agenda, and now we want to update it, and we want to get your input. So that's the second example regarding requests for requests for comments. And a third example, hang on a second. All right, the order is not the race and ethnicity was a request for comment. The learning agenda was a request for information, and now I'm going to go to another request for comment, which is the Census Bureau. You may know in March, at the end of March, the IRS issued a proposed rule saying we want to revise our regulations to allow the Census Bureau to look at a lot more tax data so they can crunch the numbers and we can better understand the socioeconomic conditions and status of the American population, particularly how they use tax credits. So this is a request for comment on a proposed rule. And this goes on for 6 pages, and it lays out the proposed rule and it asks for comment. The opportunity to comment has closed April 29th. And then IRS will come out with their final rule at the end of their review period. So again, this is another opportunity to provide input on how statistics are made available. In this case, it's not made available to the public, but the public gets the benefit of the numbers crunched by the Census Bureau of confidential information. Okay, so with those 3 things, before I move on to the Paperwork Reduction Act, requests for comments, requests for information, I have requests for questions from you all. I'll take a couple, 3 right now, and then we can move on. Any questions?
Andrew, I'm going to ask one. Thinking about, and maybe this is, are you going to get to how people should structure their comments when they respond?
Yes.
Okay.
I will.
All right. Then never mind, I'll wait.
Okay. I'm going to do that after the next one. Okay.
Andrew, can I jump in real quick and ask a question?
Please.
This is Doug Gevert. I'm trying to figure out in our AI world, has there been kind of a use of generative AI to push out like more volume of responses to these sorts of requests? I can imagine somebody hijacking and just beginning to send thousands of comments that agencies are going to have to respond to. Is that an issue, or is that not an issue?
It's a good question, and I have not heard of that. It sounds like an accident waiting to happen, but I have not heard of that. On the flip side, I also think there's an opportunity for AI to roam through the Federal Register and actually put together what I do by hand, which is find these requests for information and put them out to people who would make use of them and really do some matchmaking between the nature of announcements and the kinds of people who might find them of interest. So I think there's a real opportunity there. I will also say that some federal agencies are actually frustrated by the lack of comment they get. And OMB sent a person for a year to the Yale Tobin Center for Economic Research to try to look at ways to improve the frequency of engagement of commenters. I don't know what they've come up with, but this is a big enough worry that they actually sent someone away for a year to try to figure it out. And Connie says, Connie, you want to just make your statement, please?
Yes. For those 20,000 comments on Fiscal Policy Directive 15, race ethnicity, OMB did get, there was someone at Census, and this was presented in a webinar that NIST and FCSM were put on, used an AI, algorithms to bucket those comments into themes so that they could deal with the volume. And I do think they said that a lot of commenters used a similar language and sort of template. And I imagine a number of advocacy groups circulated sort of, if you agree with this, here's a response to put in. But anyway, AI was used to help OMB sort through all those comments.
Thank you. So now I'll go to the Paperwork Reduction Act, in which I will describe two instances in which I responded and got feedback. So this gets to the how aspect that is good both for this, but also for the prior two categories of requests for comment and requests for information. So let me hang on, please. Actually, I have one more example of requests for information, and then we'll go to the Paperwork Reduction Act. Okay, this came out actually in December when it was the comment period was extended in February, but it just ended last Monday. This is a Department of Labor, the Office of Foreign Labor Certification. People who want to come to this country have, with certain kinds of visas, have to be certified that they're not taking a job from an American and not reducing other Americans' wages because someone's underpaying them. And there is something called Schedule A at the Department of Labor, in which you can put on certain occupations that are certified ahead of time, being in short supply, so the employer does not have to get an individual certification for a worker that they could not find an American for this job. It saves the employer 6 months of bureaucratic review, which is a big deal. So because of politics, Schedule A, the occupations on Schedule A have not been updated since 1992. In other words, 32 years ago, because it's very contentious. And there's been no methodology. No methodology was in legislation to update Schedule A. It was all at the Secretary's whim. So in the AI, actually, the Artificial Intelligence Executive Order of last fall, the President ordered the Labor Department to issue this request for information about how to modernize Schedule A through some kind of statistical methodologies to figure out which occupations were in short supply, and so could bypass this one-by-one labor certification. This is, again, another example of programmatic use of statistics and asking for a request for information here. So that's that one. Now, Paperwork Reduction Act. The Paperwork Reduction Act, the PRA, as you may know, every statistical survey has a little OMB control number at the bottom of it. And it's typically 4 numbers with a dash and then 4 more numbers. And the first 4 numbers reflect the agency. And the second four numbers are the specific data collection. And by regulation and based on law, every federal data collection has to go through 2 periods of public comment. Period 1 is that the agency announces in the Federal Register, we are planning to submit to OMB this survey for its approval, but before we do, we want to get public input. The public has 60 days to give us, the Census Bureau, Bureau of Labor Statistics, Bureau of Justice Statistics, your input regarding this particular survey. And we will take all of the comments, we will respond to them in public, and we will send your comments and our response to OMB when we submit it. So 60 days are up, often 2 weeks later, sometimes 18 months later, the agency will then submit to OMB its request for an approval of a survey, and there's supporting documentation called supporting statement. They issue another Federal Register notice in which the public has 30 days to respond, this time to OMB, and give OMB input regarding the survey and what they think. And so now I'm going to get into a bit of the how. When OMB reviews its requests from the agencies, it has 3 options. It can say no, which I've never seen it do. It can say yes without conditions. In other words, whatever the agency sends in, here's the survey, and it's everything related to the survey. It's the survey form, it's the cover letter going to the respondents, please fill out the survey, it's the marketing material, it's everything printed or in PDF. And the OMB will just say yes, all good. The approval is typically for 3 years, and then the agency has to come back and do it again. Option 3 is OMB says yes with conditions, where you can do this, but we have conditions. And so the trick for commenters is to suggest something that OMB adds as a condition. In other words, you're not going to get OMB to say, no, you're not going to carry out the American Community Survey. It is very valuable. If you are very happy with what is being proposed to OMB, to simply send up a 3-sentence letter saying, I support this, is very helpful. So it takes about 2 minutes of your time, and it's good for the agency, and it's good that OMB knows that someone's supporting it, and you can add 3 more sentences to say why the ACS is important, or why pop estimates is not pop estimates, but why the survey of jails from the Bureau of Justice Statistics is important, and that's good. It takes very little of your time. It's very helpful. When you want to make a change, it is very difficult at this point. In the 60-day period, when you're writing the agency, it's okay, and I encourage you to suggest changes in the wording of the questionnaire. You can say this wording is confusing, or why don't you add this question, that kind of thing. When it gets to OMB, it's too late. The agency won't say that, but OMB is not going to start messing with the survey at that point. So when you send a comment to OMB, a suggestion, my experience is what works best is when you are asking OMB to tell the agency, say to the agency, yes, you can do this as you submitted it with the following conditions and I'll show you a couple examples of conditions that improve the situation and didn't change the survey itself. So you may be familiar with the new annual integrated economic survey, which is just came out this year from Census. It's a rolling up of 7 different long-standing annual surveys in different industries. And it was getting a lot of companies were getting 3 or 4 surveys. So they rolled it up into one. This is based on recommendations from Connie's shop. Connie was probably involved with this, or Tom Messenborg. And so Census goes to OMB and asks for permission to do the American Economic Survey. And now this is what the OMB website looks like. This is reginfo.gov. This looks like we entered a time machine and it's 2002. This is a very clunky old web face. And you can see here that there's a term of clearance, that OMB approves this. How, in addition, in light of the Bureau's findings that the NAICS classification can be unnatural or challenging for some businesses, by June 2024, next month, OMB shall submit a research plan to address NAICS classification issues. That came from me. I sent a letter to OMB, and there's a second page for these things in which there's the technical documentation and then the letter that I sent. And in that letter, which I now show you, so I sent a letter last May in which I comment on the AIES and I say I enthusiastically support it and I give a recommended term of clearance, which OMB used and changed a bit, and that's fine. And I gave my reasoning, which was that the Census Bureau itself said that companies found it difficult to figure out which NAICS code they were in. So I, as an economic analyst, I'm interested in accurate NAICS codes. I would like to have the Census Bureau understand why people are misclassifying themselves and what can be done to improve that. So I put together a 2-page letter in which the bulk of it is me just quoting back what the Census Bureau found with a proposed term of clearance. And so the result is, again, back to this page, OMB bought it. And so now Census is on the hook for coming up with a research plan. So that's example 1. Example 2 is from the 2020 census. So here, right, even though the 2020 census is in the Constitution, the census still has to go through OMB review. We can get an OMB control number. So you might remember from the 2020 census, there were many innovations, and one of them was a much greater use of administrative records to fill in the blanks, to figure out all sorts of things, in ways that were not possible in 2010. And in the submission to OMB, Census was pretty opaque about how they were going to use administrative records. So I wrote in to say, why don't you approve the 2020 census on the condition that Census come up with a memo regarding how it's using administrative records in the 2020 census. And so OMB put that in here. And they say Census Bureau's commitment in supporting Statement A because after I wrote that, OMB got the Census Bureau to rewrite supporting Statement A to add its commitment, which was not there in there originally. And the result was this memo that came out. So what I just showed you was from February. The term of clearance was February of 2020, and 10 weeks later, Census comes out with a memo. And in my letter, I had asked for basically a spreadsheet of the rows being the administrative types of administrative records like driver's licenses, and the columns being the various uses in the census operations. And that's what, I'm not going to bring that up, but that's what Census produced. So this is an example of how one person can have an impact on this, multi-billion-dollar affair. Because I was not messing with the 2020 census. I was getting information that users and stakeholders could make use of. And so clearly there is a strategy for picking something that you think OMB will say yes to, sort of like getting to yes. Now, OMB is supposed to make your letter public. So if you're asking for something that seems quite reasonable and they don't do it, your letter is up there. Now, it's a separate question, who's going to actually look at your letter? But it's there. In my experience, OMB really appreciates the kind of insight I'm giving them, and because they are overwhelmed with all the things they have to do. And again, as Connie knows, many of you know, the shop that reviews this stuff is just a handful of people. So outside help is often appreciated. And so that's example number 2. Let me just finish up with the last 2 categories, and then we'll just open it up for questions. Okay. So we've gone through requests for comments on drafts of various kinds of standards, of requests for information where it's this open-ended topic. Opportunities to comment on Paperwork Reduction Act submittals, the 60-day notice from the agency, comments go to the agency, 30-day notice, comments go to OMB. The fourth area is hang on a sec. Okay. It is the committees, the advisory committees. There are hundreds of advisory committees throughout the federal government. They are all managed by, in a way, the equivalent of the Paperwork Reduction Act, called the Federal Advisory Committee Act, FACA. You're familiar with the Census Scientific Advisory Committee. Census has a number of committees that are of interest to APDU members. BLS has several, the Department of Labor, BEA, pretty much every federal statistical agency has some advisory avenue by which they are getting input. And they are public meetings. They're announced in the Federal Register, and there are opportunities in every meeting for public comment. In many cases, and I believe this is true for CSAC, they will post some of their presentations before the meeting, so you can actually look at them. And again, the comment period is often quite constrained, in which they'll say you have 2 minutes. You'll have 3 minutes. We don't have to respond to your comment much. You can write in your comments. So, but it's a matter of public record, as with the Paperwork Reduction Act. And again, these people will learn who you are. These agencies are always looking for people to add to their advisory committees, and so it's a way to get yourself known if that's of interest to you. But this is the fourth way to have input. These advisory committees typically advise the director of the statistical agency or the secretary. Some are given specific tasks to make recommendations on. Others are given carte blanche to do whatever they want and come back with recommendations. Both can work. I've been on both kinds. And so that's opportunity number 4. And then opportunity number 5, type number 5, is, as I mentioned, the appropriation. So there are each statistical agency's budget is determined by some subcommittee of the Appropriations Committee in the House and the Senate. And depending on your agency of interest, so Census and BEA and NCSES are in Commerce, Justice, and Science. The Bureau of Labor Statistics and NCHS and NCES are in LHHSE, and so forth. Each subcommittee has its own process for inviting written comment. So I will click on this and Okay, so this outside witness testimony, here's guidelines, right? You have to, you only get so many pages and so forth, and send it by this Friday. And the back to the how, in this case, I didn't show an example. There's a parallel here to what I was mentioning with the Paperwork Reduction Act. Ostensibly, you're commenting on, here's the budget for the Bureau of Economic Analysis is 125 million. I think it should be 135, or I think it should be 115. You can do any of that or support particular accounts. But an underutilized way of having an impact is that with each appropriations bill comes a appropriations report in which the Appropriations Committee is giving directions to the statistical agency about what the Appropriations Committee wants it to do with its money. So, for instance, pretty much every year, the Appropriations Committee tells the Bureau of Labor Statistics, give us a report sometime during the year on your sense of what the impact of advanced technology, and back to AI, the AI is going to be on job descriptions and job structure. There is an opportunity in the letters to get text, just like I proposed text for terms of clearance, propose text for the report to the agency, whatever you want. If you want the agency to let Congress know about an opportunity that Congress should know about for future years, for FY26 and 27, like what would it take? The BLS should report back to Congress regarding what the requirements for turning the occupational employment statistics into a time series, or the challenges or barriers to adding a question on the American Community Survey, a particular question that you're interested in, and anything like that. Agencies are much more likely to say yes to adding some text to the report where they get some input regarding how they should do their job, because it doesn't cost them any money. You're not asking to add money to the budget. You're asking the agency to do something they wouldn't otherwise do and inform Congress about an issue or an opportunity. I'm aware of the time. I haven't showed you an example of the reports, which I could do if necessary, but I've kind of verbally described that there's really not much to look at online. And so with that, Beth, I'll just stop, and I'm happy to take questions.
So most of the questions that have come in by chat have been answered, although there is one about, would you be willing to come back and do reginfo.gov specifically?
Sure. Yeah. That is, of all the things I've showed you, that qualifies as the weeds, as in getting into the weeds.
How about questions from others? Connie, you came off camera, or being off camera. Do you have a question?
Well, I just wanted to say this was really great information, and great at these little victories that Andrew has had, and it's a motivator here. I will say I had occasion recently to have to get into the reginfo.gov. And for a long-running survey, it's a fascinating history. If you trace back through all the PRA things of, were changes just sort of ordinary housekeeping changes in a survey, like updating the NAICS code whenever that's updated, or was there some real innovation? And so that's been quite useful for tracing that. But it is definitely not easy to that's once you find what you're looking for in the first place. So are there groups, Andrew, that are better than other groups at sort of mobilizing letters that can, or finding these opportunities, or are most the, like the AEA government statistics or APDU or PAA, the Committee on Government Statistics and all that, or are we all kind of just too in the, well, yeah, I could do this, but I've got other things to do kind of frame of mind?
I would say thank you, Connie. It's more the latter. When I've seen large scale responses to requests for comments, they're typically well organized by advocacy groups who don't usually comment on things, but often lobby Congress, or they're advocating in various modes, and they will get thousands of people, to submit comments. And Connie, help me recreate this. This is like 20 years ago. The Bureau of Labor Statistics proposed to drop counting the number of women employees in particular industries. I think that was it.
That's right.
And because it was 2005 or 6, and it was supposed to save money.
Well, and said nobody was, not hardly anybody was using the tables. They did not give users, they just sprung this. And so there's a huge hue and cry. Yes.
Correct. So there were, I don't know, you might remember, there were thousands of responses, negative.
Right.
But this was not the statistical community. This was women's advocacy groups.
That's right. And they actually got Congress to say, BLS will publish these numbers and or to collect or publish whatever it was. But it was essentially started with BLS's failure to think through, well, they didn't bring their user community. They just sort of said, okay, as of tomorrow, we're not doing something because it looks like nobody's using it. But the something hit a live wire, and you're right. And they had a huge problem there, somewhat similar to what just happened with the disability question on the ACS.
That's right. Thank you. Thank you. And then there was also, it was a much bigger deal, the citizenship question on the decennial, the 2020 decennial.
Now, for that one, actually, the Committee on National Statistics, which does not comment, as we need an impaneled study group and all that, but we stood up a working group. We gave it a name and empowered it and so on. And we actually did comment on the citizenship question from the point of view of, the autonomy of a federal statistical agency, the timing, from a statistical points of view, but raising the issue that, it looked like they were heading toward a pop register without any discussion of, any, so on that one, we weighed in. But you're right, it's the advocacy groups who, well, may not have used the question much, but they don't, whatever it is, but they're like a breakdown by sex for this BLS data, but don't like it when a statistical agency just announces something without having done much consultation. And in the disability question, my understanding is Census had consulted with there's a federal interagency ACS group and that kind of thing, but they had not at all anticipated that advocacy groups for people with disabilities would be on the warpath, given the way the new questions were going to lower the estimates, and that was just a lamentable lack of political small p savvy.
Thank you, Connie. A question for you, and then actually another suggestion for people to consider. But to what extent does CNStat, when it has its panels,
yes,
invite public comment? Do the panels invite public comment to inform the panels?
Um, it varies. First of all, there is now a process for inviting, which we send out one-wide, inviting people to nominate names, to be on, and there's an official public comment period on once the slate is up there. All panels have information gathering sessions to which which are announced, on the Academy's website. We have a newsletter where it started, in fact, because the late Catherine Wallman, when she was chief statistician, this was about 20 years ago, said, I really want to know when your meetings are that are open, and I get only sporadic information. So we came up with this, and then we added to that. There are committees that, depending on the topic, that will do public calls for like white papers or position. Here's the statement of task. What do you think about that? We did that for the recent report we did on the supplemental poverty measure, but you do have to, and we will push that out to people. But it's still a little bit Federal Registry like, in that somebody would have to be tied in to somebody who knows to go and look, that kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah. So.
And it's my experience when I have attended CNSTAT meetings, particularly when they were in person, is just simply being there and talking to people is a way to have input. You just,
it is indeed. And again, public sessions are open. They're now all at least hybrid, so you can do. Some of them are all Zoom, but they all have a hybrid Zoom option, and it's very useful in that regard. So,
and I think back to the AIES came out of a CNSTAT report.
That's correct. That Catherine Abraham chaired. Yes, it did.
And I imagine that they had some formal informal process for getting public input. So one way to have influenced the AIES is to have influenced the CNSTAT, to have given information or perspective.
Yes, and anybody, if you find out that we're doing a study, can write, can find out who the relevant person is, or you can always write me if you, and can have an opportunity to submit input one way or another. Yes, that's integrated, whatever they're calling it now, survey did come about from a CNSTAT report. The Census Bureau was extremely siloed among, the retail trade people, the services people, et cetera. And so this is really a win for all kinds of reasons. So
yes.
including the companies who were getting bombarded with different, surveys.
So I think we can consider CNSTAT as a sixth avenue, and a seventh is this, which Connie and I spoke about for a different reason last week, which is that the statistical agencies are, there's an opportunity to inform the statistical agencies about how users are using their data. The agencies are not able to keep up with all the different ways that their data are being relied on. And so I encourage people to cold call or cold email statistical staff and let them know. You don't have to have an invitation. You can just write them and say, I just really want to let you know how important this data set is to this work, and this is my idea for how it might improve. You can do that without invitation.
Yes. I just wanted to say in the chat, were you looking for the oh, you're looking for the administrative data. Yeah, that's good. No,
Okay.
Statistical agencies are, in my view, don't do nearly enough to track through, it doesn't mean they can't and shouldn't, be following up every single use trail, but they know who some of their users are, and they could be probing various ways of what are the secondary and tertiary uses that go off of somebody like a state demographer or a company that, adds value to federal data, or a university person or federal agency. And they would, I think, learn a lot if they were to do that.
Well, and I want to build off of that for just a second, because when we were talking about Federal Register notices that were effective at making change, there was one that was less effective. I think 2019, leading up to the 2020 census, there was a Federal Register notice saying, how do you use decennial census data?
Yeah.
Connie's nodding. And people didn't know what to do with it. They didn't the people, the city planners, the people working in healthcare aren't following the Federal Register and didn't even know to respond. And so I think it's really important, but there have to be other mechanisms. So
Other channels.
Andrew, I'm glad you
channels.
mentioned, just reach out and tell the staff, because it can't just be, FRNs are incredibly important, which is why we're talking about it today. But that can't be the only channel for getting that information, and seeing groups, seeing the statistical agencies doing more to focus on data user community input, whether it's through APDU or through the ACS data users community, or Friends of BLS. Those sort of not formalized channels are really important.
Yes, they are.
I think the Census Bureau, it's way late, but it's better late than never. They are much better now at, in their daily email blasts, actually indicating, hey, there's this request for comment on SOGI, the Federal Register notice, or the ACS for 2025. They never used to do that, but now they're publicizing their own Federal Register notices, which is really good. Yeah. I want to raise, and it's a bigger deal, but I'm counting right, the 8th Avenue, which is organizing a briefing on Capitol Hill. Now that takes time and money, but APDU could do that, and I want to give an example of how it can work. In 2012, I was approached by the American Economic Association, which was worried about the budget for the 2012 economic census. And as you know, the economic census is the foundation for all economic statistics, macroeconomic statistics, GDP, and everything it spins off of that. So, and economists don't get tenure unless they produce peer-reviewed journal articles. And if you have crappy data from the 2012 economic census, you can't publish. So they were really scared. And Congress was underfunding the 2012 economic census. It was really in jeopardy. So I got approached. Would I organize a briefing on Capitol Hill to inform Congress about the importance of fully funding the 2012 economic census? And I got a budget from AEA. I actually hired Mary Jo Hoeksema, and I'm blanking on our friend who lives in Mexico. I can't remember if she's still involved anymore. Anyway, so the three of us organized a briefing on the Hill, and we got Brookings economists, we got big name economists, and Steve Landefeld, and did a show and tell for staff, and the higher budget got passed. So that was not lobbying, that was information and briefing. And so that's all possible too.
Yeah. We have just about 4 minutes left. Does anyone have any final questions? A couple comments in the chat, but no questions. Well, we're giving people a moment to think about that. Andrew, do you have any parting comments other than yes, please comment, which everyone here should be doing?
So I have a question for everyone, and it's back to something that Connie raised, which is, to what extent have people commented up to this point? And if they haven't commented much, why?
Can I ask, because I was on a couple of the meetings where they were it was where it was public hearing stuff. Since I've already commented in there about the need to support, data.gov and, increasing the budgets and stuff like that. Will it be discounted if I write something as well? Or, because I've already voiced my opinion and I've, encouraged others to as well, but what
I
is
don't
my
think it
role?
hurts. I think it's so that they are, so it doesn't raise any questions in their mind. You can say in your letter, I did submit a comment in this other venue, but I want to reiterate the following.
Sure,
Oh, okay.
sure.
And I'll add, because part of my work has also been state and regional and local government, and similar comment rules apply where you've got your 2 minutes or 3 minutes at a public meeting. There's no rule that says you can't do both, that you can't submit written and I like the idea of noting, hey, I also commented in person at X meeting on this date. But there's squeaky wheels are the ones that get the attention. And if saying it 5 different times in 5 different formats is what it takes to get someone to listen, there's no rule that says you can't do that. So I would encourage it. And everyone who has to listen and come through public comments is thinking like, but that's what it's there for. Like we should be saying things early and often. It's not like voting. You can't just do it once. You can say multiple times.
Right.
But we're all preaching to the choir. How do we, with the elections in Maryland, I should have asked the candidates, where do you fall on this?
Beth, I do have one other substantive suggestion to make, which is when you submit comments, be as concrete as it's much more helpful to provide concrete examples of the benefits or the costs of something, of the nature of the problem that would happen if something's not funded, or if the question is worded this way, or the nature of the benefit if your advice is taken. Because for the responder and the receiver of the response, they have to care about what you're saying. And if you're giving general statements about funding census is really important because millions of people make business decisions every day, period, that's not helpful. But when you can speak about, back to counting for dollars and how an underfunded census would harm this community in this way, is really important. The Congress and the agency have to think there is a consequence for them in not listening to your advice, in which they either miss an opportunity to make their lives better, their own personal lives, professional lives better, or that people are going to be mad at them because they screwed up.
All right, well, we are just about at time. And with that, I want to thank Andrew for a fantastic walkthrough today, and just let you know about a couple of events that are coming up. And I'm going to paste the links into chat, so if you see me looking over to the side, that's why. We have a webinar coming up on data opportunities and challenges in a post-Roe world. Also, for any of you who do data visualization or storytelling, we have data storytelling awards that are open. You can submit for yourself, your own work, or for a colleague's if you think they've done a great job. And a reminder that we have our conference coming up in July, and all 3 of those links are in the chat. We hope to see you at one or all of those. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.